There's a vegetable that produces food for 20 years from a single planting, another that tastes exactly like oysters, and one that grew in the ruins of battlefields like nature's apology for war. All of them used to be common in American gardens during the Civil War. None of them exist in yours. Salsify the vegetable that tasted like oysters. When oysters were a luxury most soldiers and homesteaders couldn't afford, gardens across America grew something almost as good. A humble white root that, when cooked, fooled even the most discerning palates. Some called it the oyster plant, and for good reason. This long, pale root, about the thickness of a carrot but often twice as long, had a secret. Boil it until tender, mash it with butter, or fry it in a cast iron skillet, and it tasted remarkably like oysters. It wasn't just reminiscent, it genuinely delivered that briny, mineral-rich flavor that made people close their eyes and swear they were eating seafood. During the Civil War, real oysters were expensive and hard to come by, especially inland. But salsify grew reliably in backyard gardens, producing long white roots that could stretch 8 to 10 inches beneath the soil. Families would harvest them in fall, store them in root cellars through winter, and pull them out when they needed something special. A little cream, some seasoning, and suddenly a humble root vegetable became a delicacy. The plant even produced beautiful purple flowers in its second year, though most folks never let it get that far. They wanted the roots. But salsify had a problem. Those long, thin roots were difficult to harvest without breaking, and cleaning all the little rootlets took patience. As convenience became king and grocery stores stocked everything, salsify quietly disappeared. Today, you can still find seeds in heirloom catalogs, but good luck finding anyone who's actually tasted it. Although, if you're curious enough to order those seeds, that oyster flavor is still there, waiting in the ground. Cowpeas, the South's secret weapon against hunger. While northern gardens grew green beans, southern families knew a tougher, smarter crop. One that could handle scorching heat, poor soil, and still produce enough protein to keep a family alive. Cowpeas. You might know them as black-eyed peas, but back then they went by dozens of names: Crowder peas, cream peas, zipper peas. They all shared one critical trait: they refused to quit. When summer temperatures climbed past 100 degrees, cowpeas kept growing. When soil was exhausted, they improved it, pulling nitrogen from the air and fixing it back into the ground. When the war came, that refusal to quit became the difference between eating and starving. Families could plant cowpeas in the porous dirt and still harvest bushels. Fresh in summer, they tasted sweet and tender. But the real genius was drying them. Those hard little peas stored through winter, ready to be cooked into thick, sustaining meals. Hoppin' John, that classic southern dish of peas and rice, wasn't just tradition. It was a strategy for making it through to spring. Cowpeas fed everyone: enslaved people, poor white families, soldiers on both sides. They were democratic that way, hearty, productive, and packed with nutrition. Then came peace, and with it, a strange amnesia. Cowpeas became associated with poverty and hardship. As green beans and snap peas took over, cowpeas got pushed aside. We replaced survival with convenience and forgot which one actually kept us alive. Cowpeas were smart. They improved the soil. But the next crop took a different approach. Instead of improving anything, it just grew so massively that nothing else mattered. Mangelwurzels, the giant roots that fed families and livestock. In farmhouse gardens, there grew roots the size of a man's leg. They weren't just for the animals. When food ran short, these massive beets kept children from going hungry. The name sounds strange now, but every farmer knew them. These enormous fodder beets could weigh 10 to 20 pounds each, growing so large that half the root pushed up above the soil line. You could see them from across the field, bulging red, yellow, or orange globes. When the war came, that size meant everything. A single plant produced enough food to matter. Families kept the biggest ones for livestock, sure. But when winter stretched long, those same families would pull a Mangelwurzel for themselves. Grated and fried, they were mild and slightly sweet. Boiled and mashed, they stretched stews and made thin soups feel substantial. They weren't as refined as table beets, but they filled bellies. And they stored like champions. lasting until spring. Plant a small patch and you could harvest hundreds of pounds of food with almost no effort. But somewhere along the way, we decided we were too good for them. Mangelwurzels became livestock food, a symbol of desperation. People wanted vegetables that sounded fancy, not roots that reminded them of hard times. Walk through 100 modern gardens and you won't see one. Turns out, pride doesn't fill a cellar like a good Mangelwurzel does. Skirret, the sweet root that vanished. Before carrots took over, there was a sweeter, stranger root that grew in clusters like pale fingers. Thomas Jefferson grew them at Monticello. Skirrets. This perennial root vegetable had been feeding people since Roman times, but by the Civil War era, it was already fading. The plant produced multiple tuberous roots in a cluster, each one white and slim. And they were sweet. Not just mildly pleasant, but genuinely sweet, with a nutty richness that fell somewhere between a carrot and a parsnip. When the war came and sugar was scarce, that natural sweetness mattered. Boiled and buttered, skirret roots tasted like a treat. Added to stews, they brought a hint of comfort. The real advantage was that skirret was perennial. Plant it once, and it came back year after year without replanting. In uncertain times, that reliability was worth everything. But skirret had a fatal flaw. Those roots grew in tight, fiddly clusters that were time-consuming to clean. Carrots were cleaner, simpler. As American gardens shifted toward convenience, skirret quietly disappeared. We traded sweetness and perennial reliability for a vegetable that was easier to wash. A few permaculture gardeners are bringing it back, realizing perennial vegetables might be exactly what resilient food systems need. Now, these first 4 crops were forgotten mostly because they were inconvenient. But the next ones? They disappeared for stranger reasons. Some because we forgot a single crucial trick about when to harvest them. Others because we literally forgot they existed. Ground cherries, the wild gold that grew in abandoned fields. After battles ended and fields lay scorched, something sweet started growing in the ruins. Little golden fruits wrapped in papery husks, like nature's care packages. They'd spring up along fence lines, in abandoned gardens where nothing else would grow. Each fruit was about the size of a marble, hidden inside a delicate lantern-shaped husk. Peel back that papery covering and you'd find a golden berry that tasted like the tropics. Pineapple, vanilla, and honey all mixed together. Soldiers on both sides would forage for them. How could something that tasted so sweet be growing wild in Virginia or Pennsylvania? When your daily rations were hardtack biscuits and salt pork, finding a patch of ground cherries felt like discovering treasure. Civilians knew them too, gathering them for preserves or drying them like raisins. The plants took care of themselves, self-seeding, sprawling, and thriving in poor soil. You didn't plant ground cherries so much as let them happen. But that wild nature became their downfall. They looked like weeds, and the fruits were too delicate to ship. As agriculture got organized, ground cherries got left behind. These days you might find them at a farmer's market, but most people have never tasted that wild golden sweetness. We domesticated everything and lost something that was perfectly wild. Ground cherries grew in the ruins, sweet and wild. But not every forgotten crop needed drama to survive. Some just quietly refused to die, growing through winter itself. Corn salad, the winter lettuce that grew in snow. When winter locked down the garden and fresh greens were a memory, one plant didn't care. It pushed through frozen ground, giving families vitamin-rich leaves when scurvy threatened. Some folks called it mosh, but whatever the name, it was the green that refused to quit. While lettuce shriveled at the first frost, corn salad just kept growing. Small rosettes of dark green leaves would emerge from the snow, tender and mild. When the war came, that winter endurance could mean the difference between health and sickness. Scurvy wasn't just a sailor's disease. Families needed every source of vitamins they could find. Corn salad was rich in vitamin C and iron, and it grew when nothing else would. You could harvest it fresh all winter long. The plant practically took care of itself. Self-seeding, cold-hardy, needing almost no attention. It would volunteer year after year. But then, refrigeration changed everything. Grocery stores started stocking lettuce year-round. Winter greens became something you bought, not grew. Corn salad faded from American gardens. Today, you might find it on fancy restaurant menus, but ask a home gardener about it and you'll mostly get blank stares. White sweet potatoes, the North's answer. Everyone knows sweet potatoes saved the South, but fewer remember the pale, dry varieties Northern families relied on. They didn't look like much. Pale skin, cream-colored flesh. And they didn't taste the same either. These weren't candy sweet. They were dry, fluffy, almost chestnut-like. You could use them in savory dishes without feeling like you'd added dessert to dinner. That difference mattered up north, where growing seasons were shorter. The orange sweet potatoes that thrived in the South struggled in Pennsylvania and Ohio. But white varieties had been bred for exactly those conditions. They matured faster, tolerated cooler soil, and still produced calories. Families would cure them and pack them into root cellars where they'd keep through winter. During the war, those calories counted. White sweet potatoes were dense, filling, and versatile. Then, the orange sweet potato became the standard. Its sweetness appealed to modern tastes, and dry became synonymous with inferior. Today, most of those northern varieties are gone. The genetic diversity, the regional adaptations, all lost because we decided there was only one right way for a sweet potato to be. Cardoons, the artichoke's forgotten cousin. In gardens from Pennsylvania to Louisiana, there grew a plant so tall and silvery it looked like a thistle made of moonlight. Families didn't eat the flower buds. They ate the stalks, and they tasted like the finest artichoke hearts. Picture this: an immigrant family's garden, growing something that looked like it belonged in a medieval tapestry. Related to artichokes, these plants would shoot up 5 or 6 feet tall, their leaves covered in a silvery fuzz, crowned with dramatic purple thistle flowers. People thought they were crazy for wasting garden space until they tasted what those families knew how to cook. Italian and Spanish immigrants brought cardoons to America. When the war came, those traditions spread. The preparation took patience. You'd blanch the stalks by wrapping them to keep them white and tender. Then you'd harvest, strip, and braise them. Braised properly for hours, they transformed. The bitterness mellowed into something sophisticated. That artichoke flavor, but deeper, nuttier, almost meaty. When protein was scarce, a plate of cardoons felt like civilization. But that blanching process was labor-intensive. When artichokes became more available, people realized they could just harvest the bud and skip the work. Cardoons started disappearing. We traded a month-long harvest and stunning beauty for the convenience of a single bud. You might be noticing a theme. We gave up on foods that required patience, that demanded we understand the seasons. But here's what haunts me. Some of these crops didn't just feed our ancestors. They fed the people who were here before any of us, and we still managed to forget them. Parsnips, the winter root that everyone forgot how to cook. There was a time when every American knew this. Parsnips got sweeter after frost. The first freeze wasn't the end of harvest. It was when these roots became worth eating. Somehow, we forgot. Parsnips look like pale carrots, but that's where the similarity ends. Before frost, they're woody and bitter. But after the ground freezes, the cold triggers the plant to convert its starches into sugars. What emerges is candy sweet, earthy, and rich in a way no carrot could match. Civil War families understood this. They'd leave parsnips in the ground all winter. When they needed fresh vegetables in January, they'd dig through frozen earth and pull up roots that tasted like they'd been glazed with honey, roasted, mashed, or even in pies. That winter availability was everything. When the root cellar was running low, parsnips were still there, getting sweeter by the week. But somewhere along the line, we lost the timing. People started harvesting them in fall like carrots. They'd taste them, find them bitter, and decide parsnips weren't worth growing. Today, grocery stores sell parsnips year-round, harvested before frost, and people wonder why they're so bland. We forgot that patience and cold weather were part of the recipe. We forgot that parsnips needed frost, but at least you replanted them. The next crop? You planted it once and your grandchildren could still be harvesting from it. Good King Henry, the perennial spinach that lived for decades. Imagine planting spinach once and harvesting it for 20 years. That's what families did. They'd establish a patch of Good King Henry, and it would outlive the children who first planted it. This perennial green was spinach's hardier, more reliable cousin, planted, and it just kept going. Year after year, spring through fall, sending up fresh leaves that tasted mild, like spinach with a slightly mineral edge. In early spring, the shoots came up thick and tender, and you could harvest them like asparagus. When the war came, that perennial nature meant survival. When gardens were destroyed by marching armies, good King Henry just kept growing. It didn't need replanting. It was there when families returned to scorched farms, still producing food. A single patch could feed a family for decades. But after the war, people wanted annual vegetables, the kind you planted fresh each spring. Good King Henry started feeling old-fashioned. Today, it's nearly extinct in American gardens. A few permaculture enthusiasts grow it, but most people have never heard of it. We forgot that planting once and harvesting forever was even possible. Jerusalem artichokes, the native crop that saved white settlers. When Union soldiers marched through unfamiliar territory and Confederate families faced starvation, they both turned to the same crop. One that had been there long before any of them, planted by hands that knew this land better than anyone. The name is misleading. They're not from Jerusalem, and they're not artichokes. They're sunchokes, a native North American tuber. Native peoples had been cultivating them for centuries. The plant is a sunflower relative, shooting up 6 to 10 feet tall. But underground, knobby tubers cluster nutty and slightly sweet, crunchy when raw and creamy when cooked. When the war came, soldiers learned to recognize the tall stalks and dig for the tubers. They roasted them over campfires, boiled them, or ate them raw. The plant itself was nearly indestructible, spreading aggressively and producing tons of tubers with no care. There's a bitter irony here. Native peoples cultivated these for centuries. European settlers arrived, fought a war that would lead to further displacement of those same peoples, and survived that war in part by eating the crops Native Americans had domesticated. We took the food, forgot where it came from, and then decided it wasn't good enough. After the war, sunchokes gained a reputation for causing gas. They didn't fit neatly into commercial agriculture. Today, health food circles are rediscovering them, but the stigma lingers. Auroch, the spinach that thrived when real spinach failed. In the brutal summer heat that wilted spinach and turned lettuce bitter, one plant kept growing. Its leaves came in shades of red, gold, and green. Auroch, mountain spinach. The plant would shoot up 4 or 5 feet tall, its leaves shifting colors like a living kaleidoscope. But the real beauty was what it did when everything else quit. True spinach would bolt in the 90s. Auroch thrived in that same heat, producing tender leaves all summer long. For southern families, that heat tolerance meant continuous greens when they needed them most. You could harvest the young leaves for salads or cook the mature leaves like spinach. The plant even reseeded itself, volunteering year after year. Then modern plant breeders developed heat-tolerant spinach varieties, and auroch seemed unnecessary. Climate change is making that question feel short-sighted. As summers get hotter, those old heat-loving crops are starting to look pretty smart again. But auroch remains rare. We've talked about roots, greens, and beans, but the last 3 stories aren't really about vegetables. They're about what gardens meant when survival wasn't guaranteed. About memory, tradition, and the one crop that wasn't a crop at all. Turnip greens, the leaves everyone threw away. Families planted turnips for the roots. But when food got scarce, they discovered something. The leaves were better than the roots. Turnip greens. It sounds obvious now, but it wasn't always. You know what's wild? Northern families were throwing away more nutrition than they were eating. They'd harvest turnips, cut off the leafy tops, and toss them to the pigs, with no idea what they were discarding. The greens were more nutritious than the roots, packed with vitamins and minerals. The South knew better. Enslaved people and poor families had long understood that turnip greens were a gift. Cooked low and slow with a piece of fatback, those bitter leaves turned tender and rich, the pot liquor becoming liquid gold. A splash of vinegar, and you had a meal that satisfied in ways the pale root never could. The pot liquor alone was worth more nutritionally than the root. When the war came, that knowledge spread. Desperation taught northern families what southern cooks already knew. Suddenly, those discarded leaves became valuable. But the divide never fully closed. Southern cooking preserved the tradition. Mainstream America mostly forgot. Today, grocery stores often sell turnips with the greens already removed, treating them as waste. We're still throwing away the best part. Soldier beans, the heirloom that marched to war. Some bean varieties got their names from flowers or colors. This one got its name because it went to war. In haversacks and knapsacks, these beans marched with soldiers and came home to gardens, white with distinctive red markings. They were the perfect military ration. Dried beans weighed almost nothing, stayed good for months, and packed serious protein. For soldiers living on salt pork and hardtack, a pot of bean soup was often the only hot meal they'd get. The beans were creamy when cooked, mild-flavored, and they held their shape instead of turning to mush. But here's what made them special. When soldiers came home, many brought seeds with them. They'd plant those same beans in their family gardens, a living reminder of what they'd survived. Wives and mothers would save seeds each year, passing them down. Some families grew the exact same variety for 100 years, the beans becoming a connection to an ancestor who'd fought. Those specific heirloom varieties carried stories. Then modern agriculture standardized everything. Navy beans and pinto beans replaced the old soldiers. The specific strains got lost, and with them, the stories. We replaced memory with efficiency. The neighbor's seed swap, the crop that wasn't a crop at all. The most important thing Civil War-era gardens grew wasn't a vegetable, it was trust. When families saved seeds and traded them in spring, they weren't just sharing plants. They were keeping each other alive. Every spring, neighbors would gather with paper packets and cloth bags, each filled with seeds from last year's best plants. You'd bring your healthiest tomato seeds, the beans that produce the most, and you'd trade. Your corn for their squash. It wasn't about money, it was about survival through sharing. When the war came and commercial seed supplies were disrupted, those neighbor networks became lifelines. If your seeds failed, you could knock on a door and someone would share. Because next year, you'd do the same for them. The system ran on trust. You gave your best seeds, not your worst, because your neighbor's garden success meant your own survival. Seed swaps became social events, chances to exchange knowledge and build the community bonds that held neighborhoods together. Then, hybrid seeds came along, seeds that wouldn't breed true. Seed companies made saving your own seem old-fashioned. Individualism made sharing feel unnecessary. Today, there are seed libraries, but they're a fraction of what once existed. We lost more than genetic diversity. We lost the relationships that were built around taking care of each other. Maybe that's the crop we need to grow again, not just the seeds, the trust. If this made you see gardens differently, hit that like button. And subscribe, because we're diving into more forgotten history that actually matters, the kind of knowledge our grandparents knew, and we're just starting to remember.